Hey everybody, Mike Lukic here, and welcome back to the Solver School YouTube channel. Today is the second episode of my Solver Shorts series. This is a series where I'm going to be creating some smaller bite-sized pieces of content where I focus on a feature or a tip within solvers that might take about 10 or 15 minutes long over the course of a video to explore. Now, today's video is going to be an extension of the first episode where I looked at PioSolver bet sizing syntax, and I got a number of messages from people out there who have seen the channel before, know that I typically dive a lot into GTO Plus, and were really asking if I could do the same type of video using GTO Plus. So in today's video, I'm going to be going through the various shorthand syntax that you can utilize when building your game trees within GTO Plus. Now, if you're interested in diving deep into any of these concepts, do make sure you check out my Solver Masterclass at my website, www.solver.school, where I have over 30 hours worth of content within the Solver Masterclass teaching you everything that you need to know about using solvers. And if you'd like to stay up to date with all of the Solver shorts that get released here on the YouTube channel, do make sure you subscribe to my channel below. But without any further ado, let's hop over into GTO Plus and a corresponding PowerPoint slide where I go through the GTO Plus bet sizing syntax. Now, just as I did in the first Solver Shorts video where I looked at bet sizing syntax in PioSolver, I'm going to be working off of this summary PowerPoint slide, but I'm also going to be jumping over into the GTO Plus software after I demonstrate the particular concept, just to show you how it actually works within the software. Now, some of these examples that I'm going to show you work exactly the same way in GTO Plus as they do in PioSolver. So there's going to be a little bit of an overlap here, but there is some nuance between the two pieces of software, which I'm going to go through in the course of this presentation. So we'll start with the actual first two here, and they're similar in regards to what you can do in PioSolver. There's first the numeric option, and this works exactly the same way in GTO Plus as it does in PioSolver. You have the option of putting in just a number into the space, and what that number represents is a percent of the pot that you would like that bet size or raise size to be. So if you enter a 33, that's going to equate to a 33% pot size bet. If you put that in the raise field, it's going to equate to a 33% pot-sized raise. And that's just calculated using the pot size at the time of that particular node. So the pot size can change if there's other previous action earlier on in that street. It's not necessarily the pot size at the beginning of that street, it's the pot size at the beginning of that particular node or that particular action. You can put multiple bet sizes in here, so you can put in 33, 80, and that's going to equate to two bet sizes of 33% pot and 80% pot, and so on and so forth. You can continue adding bet sizes, and your limitation is really going to be the processing power that you have in your computer or the memory that you actually have within your computer. I've also added this second bullet here, which we'll go over quickly, and that's the all-in functionality. And you just have to type in the letter A, and that's going to add an all-in option. So let's just jump over into GTO Plus and take a look at the examples for entering numeric values and entering the letter A to add an all-in. So now we're over here in GTO Plus, and I've set up a basic tree of a button open and a big blind defense. The ranges that I chose for this aren't really that important. I also have just a sample random board with a starting pot of 1,000 and effective stacks, a starting pot of 100 and effective stacks of 1,000. Now within GTO Plus, all of these custom bet options, they involve using the custom settings for flop, turn, and river. So you can build a very, very basic tree by just choosing a default bet size. That's not the scope of this video. The scope of this video is using these custom sizings for flop, turn, and river. And I'm particularly just going to focus here on the out of position and in position settings that we have here. I'll just put in out of position bet sizes, and I'll show you that the numeric options that we have here, we can put in the out of position leading out for one bet size of 33% pot. And if the out of position player checks, I'll put in two bet sizes, the 33 and 80 that we talked about. And then for a check raise, I'm just going to put in the letter A to demonstrate an all-in this case here. So let's build this tree and see what this actually looks like. So by building this game tree, we can see that our out of position player here has the option to bet 33% pot on the flop and leading out. If the out of position player checks, the in position player here has this bet option where he or she can bet 33 or 80 because we put in those two bet sizes. And then if the in position player bets, the out of position player will just raise all in. And that was that A, and that's what we referred to. Or if he bets the bigger size, it's still going to be a raise of all in. So you can see really here quickly how these numeric options work within GTO+. All right, now we're back here, and let's take a look at the next options, which are really honestly my favorite functionality to utilize when building game trees within GTO+. And you can customize lines for probes, donks, and continuations with the letters P, D, and C following a particular numeric bet size. So P is equal to probe, D is equal to donk, and C is equal to continuation. And when these letters are utilized immediately following a number, that's only going to include that option when a particular betting pattern emerges. This is a great way to customize your game tree based on specific scenarios or based on specific lines happening. Now, a probe is when the prior street goes check, check. So if the prior street goes check, check, and the out of position player leads out in that scenario, that's called a probe bet. So by entering the letter P after a number, you are including that sized bet in the probe line. So if I included the letter P after 50, I would say whenever the probe scenario comes up after a check, check, we were giving the out of position player the option to bet 50% pot. D is a donk, and the donk is only valid when the in position player was the aggressor on the prior street. So that often happens when the line goes check, bet, call on the prior street, but it could also be when the out of position player bets and the in position player then raises. So it could be a bet, raise, call. Either way, it's when the in position player has the aggression on the prior street, and then the out of position player then leads into that player on the subsequent street. And then C stands for continuation, and that's only valid when the out of position player was the aggressor on the prior street. So the example I have there as a bet call line, if the out of position player bets and the in position player calls on the prior street, the C option being valid would allow you to customize the bet size for that scenario where we want to only look at the bet sizing for those continuation scenarios. So I know some of that can be a little bit confusing when looked at from just a language perspective. So let's hop over into GTO Plus and see what that actually looks like in practice. Now, as I mentioned here, using the P, D, and C functionalities here are really, really, really cool. And it's one of my favorite features as it relates to GTO Plus. Now, primarily, this is only going to be relevant for the out of position player on turns and rivers. There is no donking on flops. There is no continuations on flops. Like, you can force the out of position player to bet in certain scenarios on flops, but as far as solvers are concerned, when you get to the flop, they don't look at the who was the aggressor or who was the defender on prior streets or in pre-flop. So we're really here looking at the turn scenario here. And when you hover over this, you can actually see a little bit more information about this. So you can see information about the probe, the donk, and the c-bet. So I'm actually just going to use their examples here. So input as 40p, 80d, 65c. So what we're saying here in this situation is that when the out of position player is in a probe line, we're going to keep the pot size 40%. When the out of position player is in a donk line, we're going to make it 85. And when the out of position player is in a continuation line, we're going to make it 60. So what are the scenarios where that would actually happen? So the probe is the check. The donk is when the in position player was the aggressor on the prior street. And then the continuation is when the out of position player is the aggressor on the prior street. So let's build this game tree and we will take a look at what this looks like. So it retains this same numeric options for the flop. Let's look at the probe. The probe is the check scenario. So we should expect to see a 40% bet size on the turn. And sure enough, when we go check, and then the turn, we'll just give it the random 2 of hearts. This option here is to bet 40% on turns. So we can see here, when it goes check, we now have this probe bet sizing. The donk, and we have here as a donk of 85%, is when the line is check, bet, call. So it's when the in position player is the aggressor on the prior street. So we're just going to say check. We're going to give it a bet option of the small sizing, bet 33, and then we're going to give the call and give the 2 of hearts. And now we can see that this lead out option here is for 84.3% pot. GTO Plus has a way of rounding to exact numbers in certain scenarios, and here it's not quite 85% pot, but it's pretty close, and this 140 is a pretty good sizing. Pot size is 166, and our lead out option is for 85% pot. So that is our donk option. And then finally, the continuation option is when the out of position player is the aggressor on the prior street. So that is the situation where this out of position player leads and the in position player calls. So the out of position player bets 33 and the in position player calls, and we'll give that 2 of hearts again. And now with the pot size of 166, we are looking at a 60% bet size here, and the approximate here, 60.2% pot, is a 100 chip lead out here for the out of position player. So you can see here how the D, P, and C options work here for probing, donking, and continuation betting. Now the next option that we have here in GTO Plus is putting in the number 0. And what that's going to actually do is that's going to leave out a bet entirely. So if you want to force a player to check on a particular street, or if you want to force a player to not have any betting options on a particular street, you can put in the number 0, and that's going to leave out a bet entirely. This actually works really, really well when combined with those PDC options. So if I didn't want a player to have a donking option, I can put in 0D, and that's going to leave out any betting lines for the scenarios when a donk option arises. So let's jump over into GTO Plus and take a look at how that operates within the software. So now we're back over in the game tree, and we want to see what happens where we give the option of 0. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show 2 ways in which we can actually do this. We can, 1, do this here just as a plain adding a 0 in for this first bet. And then the second one, I'm going to do it just for the probing scenario. So I'll do a 0p, and we can build out the tree. And it builds a new tree, and you can see first that it's forcing a check on the out of position player. So if you want to force a check on the out of position player here, you can just take out any betting options here on this first street, and you're going to get a check 100% of the time. So we see here now that there is no betting option here on the flop. Everything is just a check. And the other option we showed here is for the probe line. So the probe line is when it goes check, check. And after going check, check, we are forcing a check on the turn as well too. However, if the line goes check, bet, call, well then we still have a bet size because we have included donk bet sizes and continuation bet sizes here. So you can see how the 0 works here to remove bets and how it can be utilized with the P, D, and C options as well too. The next option that we have is another option that is exactly the same as the way it works in PioSolver, and that's raising an amount that is a certain multiple of the prior bet. So the syntax for this is yx, where y is a number. So if I included 3x, what that's going to do is raise the prior bet 3 times the amount of the prior bet. Now, I already went over the potential challenges of this in the PioSolver video. The main one being that if players bet really large or really small in comparison to the overall size of the pot, some of your raise sizes may not necessarily be as realistic as they would be in game. But if a player is betting a normal amount, say a player bets maybe 2/3 of the pot size, a lot of times you end up seeing people in practice just raise 3 times the size of their bet or 4 times the size of their bet. So 3x or 4x might be valid options to use in those scenarios. Let's jump over into GTO Plus and we can demonstrate quickly how this works as well. So raising to a multiple of the previous bet can be effective in many regards, but I'll show you, as I demonstrated in the slides, how it can be a little problematic at times. So suppose I change this out of position lead out and I gave it a 5% bet sizing, so a super tiny bet size, and a 75% bet size. And then I gave the in-position player this 3x raise size option. And now and it's actually giving me an error here and saying that this 5 is probably too small. So I'm gonna actually make this 5, I'll just give it a 10 here and we'll see if that works. Okay, so 10 works and we have a 10% bet size and a 75% bet size. And now we can build this game tree. So we can see here that the out-of-position player has this option to bet 10 into a pot of 100 or 75 into a pot of 100. Now, when we bet 75 into a pot of 100, the in-position player can raise to 225, and the pot size here is 175 after this 75 chip bet. So this raise to 225 is actually a pretty decent raise size. It's a raise of about 60% pot. But when we look at this 10% bet size, the raise only brings it to 30. So when you bet 10 into a pot of 100, it's now a pot size of 110. This raise to 30 is somewhat unrealistic, and it's actually only a 16.7% pot raise. So that's why I would recommend, in many cases, actually having a raise size to a certain percentage instead of using this 3x or 4x or 5x functionality here, especially when you have super tiny or super large bet size options. And the last option that we have here in GTO Plus is one of the options that we talked about in PioSolver, and it's the ability to use geometric bet sizing. The syntax is a little bit different here in GTO Plus than it is in PioSolver. In PioSolver, we use the letter E. In GTO Plus, we use the letter G and then X, where X equals the number of equal bets that we want to split the effective stack into. So in this case here, if I show this example, if the pot size is 100 and the effective stacks are 1,000, G3 is going to split into 3 equal bets, making sure that the last bet is an all-in. So that's going to be 87% of the pot size as a bet size for 3 equal bets on flop, turn, and river. G2, which could be utilized on turns, would be 2 bets for 179% of the pot on turns and rivers, making sure that you are all in by the time that you get to the river. And then G1 would be just creating an all-in. So you can use G1 in the same way you would use A, and that would just create an all-in bet. I've also incorporated the formula there for the geometric bet size so that you can actually calculate what that bet size would look like based on the pot size, the effective stacks, and the number of bets in which you would like to spread that over for the course of the rest of the hand. Now let's hop over into GTO Plus and show this example before wrapping up this video. Now, the last option that we have here is using geometric bet sizes here. And the geometric bet sizes allow you to split the bets into equal bet sizes throughout the course of the rest of the hand across streets. So suppose I wanted to give this in-position player here the option to bet a geometric bet size to get all in by the river. So here's what I would do in this scenario is I would actually change these bet size options to be G3. On the turn, I would make it G2. And on the river, I would make it G1. And I would build this game tree. And what you're going to see is after a check, on the flop, we have about 88% pot. So we have an 88% pot bet. And after calling, we're going to get to a turn. That's going to bring the turn pot size to 276. After a check, it's going to bring the turn bet size to about 87% pot. So that's 240. It's about the same size pot roughly. After a bet and then a call and then a 2 of clubs river, we now have the option to just bet all in, which is again about 88 or 89% pot. So it's roughly the same size geometrically on the flop, turn, and river, utilizing this geometric functionality, G3, G2, and G1. I could, if I want to, skip this bet on the flop and have just G2 and G1, and I'll show you what that looks like here. After a check, we're going to check back always by doing so. When we get to the turn, we now have this 180% pot because it's trying to get all of the money in 2 bets as opposed to getting all of the money in across 3 streets. And then finally, what I can do here is I can actually just utilize G1, and I'll just put G1 on the flop here to show you that G1 is the same thing as adding an A. So by checking, we now just added an all-in here by entering G1 on this flop bet option. And that does it for this week's Solver Short video. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel to be notified when the next Solver Short goes live. I have a couple videos that I'm in the process of recording at the moment where I'm diving into solver accuracy and how accurate we really need to be when we are setting up our solver solutions. So be sure to subscribe to the channel and be notified when those come out. And if you're interested in diving way deeper into solver land, be sure you check out the Solver Masterclass at www.solver.school. I have over 30 hours of solver content that teaches you everything you need to know about using solvers proficiently within your own studies. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.